of her. She's real good friends with my cousin. She just, from what I know of her, she's real sweet.
Hey, everybody. We're going to get started right on time in 1 minute. All right, it's 1 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover today. Thank you for joining me. This is the Human Services Transportation Grant Application Workshop for the FTA Section 5310 Grant Program for fiscal year 2027. So for this webinar is going to cover the Section 5310 program application, and we're going to talk about all the requirements. I think this is the returning grantee group, so most of you are probably familiar with me. I'm the 5310 program manager. I wanted to throw up this slide, just give my contact information, but also make sure you know I'm the primary point of contact for this application process. However, if at any point I'm, not available or out of town during the application process, you can always reach out to Grant Sparks. His email is there. He's my supervisor. Also want to just note that during the application season, I would recommend emailing me with questions, or if you do want to have a longer, conversation, just email me to set up a time for a call. You can try calling me on the phone. I try to answer the phone quickly, but I may not be able to. So definitely, if you want a faster answer, recommend emailing me first. A little bit of housekeeping. We have you all on mute coming in. Please remain on mute for the presentation. I will pause for questions at the end of each section. When we pause for questions, you can raise your hand and come off mute yourself. Also, if you have questions throughout, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. Rather than coming off mute, I will either answer them on the fly or wait until the question section to answer them. The chat and the raise hand buttons are at the top of your screen there. You can use the chat or the Q&A, it doesn't really matter. I'll see either of them. As always, this webinar is being recorded. DRPT will post the recording on our YouTube page, and we will also send it out to all of you with the slides after the presentation. I will also include in that email some of the guidance documents that I reference in this presentation. But as you can see here, once you get the slides also have a lot of links to different resources that are available to you now. As you can see along the left-hand side, that includes the updated application and grant management guidance that is currently available on our website and is linked here. And then once the funding opportunities are posted on December 1st, you'll have access to the quarterly report template, the guidance for that, and the line item budget templates for operating other capital, as well as the application questions. All right, getting into the agenda for today. Since this is the returning group, I'm making an assumption that a lot of you are already familiar with the 5310 program. And so we are going to go pretty quickly through this section just to save us some time. We're going to talk about web grants a bit. We are going to talk generally about the application, as well as some changes from prior years, as well as quickly going through the performance reporting projections. And then we will go into each individual funding program. And at the end of each of these, if you're only interested in the capital vehicle program, you'll be able to drop off after that. Same with other capital, you can drop off after that. So just make sure if if you're only interested in one of these, just make sure you get your questions into me by the time we get to the end of those, because that will be your last opportunity if you decide to drop off. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna quickly, and you'll hear me say a lot, or kind of just that you guys already know this stuff, but if you have any questions or need me to clarify anything, please drop something in the chat, or you can raise your hand, but I'm gonna quickly go through this. This program is a federal grant through the FTA administered by DRPT. It's intended to improve mobility for seniors defined as 65 years of age and older and individuals with disabilities by removing barriers to transportation. It covers capital and operating expenses, and eligible applicants are nonprofits, state or local governments that meet these qualifications, and public transit operators. Private operators are not eligible. It is a one-year project period if awarded. Project period starts October 1st and September 30th. There is no floor or ceiling on your application amount, and it is a competitive application process each year. Returning grantees with a history of good compliance for the program are a higher priority for funding, but that doesn't mean you won't get funded if you're new or haven't had a compliance review or something like that. Eligible areas. So this I just want to touch on. The funding is apportioned from the FTA by areas defined by population. So there is basically a pot of money available for rural areas, small urbanized areas, and then the 3 large urbanized areas of Virginia. And they're defined by these population amounts here. And on the application, it will ask you what type of area you're in. I recommend, a quick Google of kind of your town or where you're applying from should give you an idea of where that is. But if you get this wrong, don't worry about it. We double check that on our end and we'll put you in the correct area. And that is based on your headquarters location. Within each apportionment area, we need to spend at least 55% on capital projects. So there's a further division of the funding in terms of what we need to prioritize to meet the FTA's requirements. So for each and every grant program, there are basically three sources of funding on each project. There's the FTA funding that we discussed. There's also state funding, which comes through the Commonwealth Mass Transit Funds, or CMTF. And this is established under the Code of Virginia. Human Service Transportation receives $1.5 million each year. We use that as your state match, and that number has been consistent every year and does not change. And then we have the local match, which we will discuss more in detail, but basically that local match can come from donations, fees, other federal funds excluding FTA DOT, state funds, local government funds, etc. It just cannot be in kind. So you're for this slide, this is just looking at last year's awards to give you an idea of what was applied for last year, how much we awarded, how much was requested, and then the total number of applicants who were awarded versus who applied. So this is just to give you an idea of that in each of these areas. We often, use most of the available funding in the area. In some areas like rural, often, for example, it comes in, the amount requested is quite a bit higher. So this was almost 2 million was requested over what we funded, which was around 2.5. So just to kind of give you an idea of the competitiveness of each of your regions. However, we are not obligated to spend all of our funding. It is a competitive application. So just because we have the money available also does not guarantee you'll be awarded. And then this is just the overall application to grant timeline. As many of you are familiar with, the applications open December 1st. They close February 1st. We go through a variety of approvals, including through the Commonwealth Transportation Board. We do our vehicle orders and collect local match, usually at the end of the summer. And then your grant project period begins on October 1st if you're awarded. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move along to the applicant requirements. Again, a lot of this should be familiar, so I'm going to go fairly quickly. If you're applying, the applicant submitting the application must be the organization that will ultimately receive the funding of the vehicles. So you cannot act as a pass-through for another organization. The same thing goes for vehicles. If you receive a vehicle, it will be titled in your name and you're responsible for all the compliance and oversight of that vehicle. That does not mean that you can't contract services from another agency. It just means that you as the applicant are the controlling party and you are responsible for all the compliance for that project. If you are working collaboratively with another organization, for example, to share vehicles. So you're using the vehicles, another organization can use the vehicles as well. We expect that that needs to be documented through an MOU to make sure, again, those vehicles are used in compliance, and you need to indicate that on your application. Again, that's just because we need to make sure everyone understands the oversight of those vehicles is with the responsible party. Coordination. So we talk about the FTA expects coordination among federally funded programs to maximize federal dollars. If you have a publicly available transportation service, you're expected to, coordinate to the extent possible with any other public transportation in your area or any other 5310 agencies in your area to make sure you're not duplicating services and make sure the best available transportation service is available to the public. Basically, looking for opportunities where possible to ensure like all the needs are being met and you're not duplicating the use of federal funds for the same type of service. As part of this coordination, we at the state level do a coordinated human service mobility plan. This is a federal requirement. As many of you know, we have been updating this plan this year, doing a lot of outreach, and a lot of you have participated in some of that outreach. So thank you for that. However, for this application, you will be still using the 2022 plan with the action tracker and the strategies listed in that plan to tie your application to the coordinated plan and respond to the strategies identified in your region. That is because our updated plan won't be coming out until the end of December. So just want to make sure everyone has plenty of time to work on their application and don't have to wait until that plan comes out. So historically, we have required a CHISM meeting with your region ahead of the application. This year, I'm not requiring that because we've been going through this update process and there's already been a lot of outreach and engagement, and I didn't really want to duplicate a lot of the work we've already done. So if any of you are wondering about the CHISM meetings, don't need to worry about that for this application cycle, and we're going to be relooking at those for next year. Another thing I like to note is that if you are an NEMT provider with Medicaid, you are still eligible to apply. You just need to be able to prove that your agency is separating out other federally funded trips from 5310 funded trips. So this is something we ask about on the application because we, again, want to make sure we're not duplicating or, paying for one trip with the two sources of federal funding. This kind of financial management practice should ultimately be reflected in your written grant management policies if you are providing NEMT Medicaid trips. Applicants need to develop and implement Title VI and ADA. So your Title VI plan, if you went through the update process with us recently, make sure you are using your updated, most up-to-date Title VI plan in your application as the attachment. If you do not have a plan in place, you will just need to put a letter in that attachment field indicating that you will work with us to create one. We offer technical assistance for that. So we'll work on that if you're awarded. Similarly, everyone needs to have an ADA notice and complaint form available, and these should be posted on your website. And so those are just some requirements to make sure that you're meeting those when you're applying and are aware of them. Finally, applicants must use our required systems and sign certain documentation ahead of the application. WebGrants is our grant application and management platform. We do not accept paper applications nor documentation sent via email. Everyone needs to use WebGrants, and Trans-Am is our vehicle inventory system. And if you don't have a Trans-Am account, if you're awarded, we will work with you to set up an account and get you into that. And then these required documents, I'll go over a little more detail later, but these are documents that should be uploaded to your organizational profile before you start applying. Just you need to make sure those are in there, certainly before you submit your application. All right, I'm gonna go move on to applying in web grants. For this, I am going to share my screen and just show you a couple of things to make sure you're aware. So let me do that real quick. All right. So
I want to make sure every personality clicks, because if it doesn't, it can make.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm in web grants. I'm on my little test account. And just want to make sure you all are aware first of where to find your organizational profile. So if you just see I clicked on my profile here at the bottom, I can go to associate organizations and click on that. And this is my organizational profile. You can edit your organizational profile here. So if you're seeing on your application, for example, that your address has changed or anything like that, you can go ahead and edit it directly from your organizational profile versus on the application itself, because it's pulling from this. And then always like to point out that under associated people, it's important to add any users that you want to added to your application as you get started. You can do that from right here by adding a new person. Please use this function versus having new staff register to create a new account via the login page. If someone's already in your system and can add them, that is the best way so that we don't get duplicated accounts. So all those people will appear here. And then this attachment section is where you can add that W-9 form and the web grants entity agreement. And if you're a previous grantee, you'll have some other documents there as well. Just wanted to point that out. And then when the grants are available, you will find them under the funding opportunities tab. Right now, as you can see, they're not open, so they're not appearing here. But this is where they will appear. They will say, you know, FTA Section 5310 Human Services Grant Program for this fiscal year. I'm going to go ahead and click into one. You will see any applications that you've started at the top of the screen and click into them from right there. And then always important to point out that on the funding opportunity itself, there is an attachment section on the funding opportunity. And this is where I will post the guidebook. The updated guidebook will be here for you to download, as well as the quarterly report projections template and the line item budget for operating other capital. So all those templates are available for you right here on the funding opportunity. So please make sure to check that. I'll also have other resources, links to web grants guidance and such on here as well. So there's good resources for you there. All right, I think that's all. Oh, actually, I wanted to share real quickly. Sorry about that. The other place you can find the web grants resources is on our website. So let me go back. So if you're on our website, drpt.virginia.gov.
Is where to speak.
My internet's being slow.
And
That's funny. Don't be-
Well, if you click into our grant programs, oh, it's not finding my page. All right, we might come back to that later, so I don't want to wait. Our internet has been being a little slow lately.
It has.
Basically, there is written guidance, step-by-step guidance on web grants. I actually linked it here, so I might just leave that with you on these slides. There's a landing page with step-by-step resources for user management as well as for applying. So I'm not going to demo the full application process here. There's also a YouTube demo of how to apply that walks through exactly the steps you need to take. So please take advantage of those if you're not exactly sure how to apply. I'm going to move along from here. When you're working on your application, this was something we started last year, and this is not required, but it will make things a lot easier for us on the back end, is to please use a standard application title. So basically the standard titling is the funding opportunity name plus your project type. And you'll see this looks maybe a little different than I had in previous years, and there's a reason for that, which I will discuss briefly or momentarily. But basically, you'll want to separate each application out and title it according to these categories. For the vehicles, you can indicate the number of vehicles you're applying for. And for operating, you can just literally put operating. You don't need to put the word 5310 in front of any of these. We know what it is based on the funding opportunity you're in. So you can use that simple titling system. Again, if you don't do this, I won't be mad at you. It is just to make it a little bit simpler for us on the back end. All right, application tips. These are just some things to keep in mind. Again, you'll have these slides for your reference afterward. So I'll go through a couple of these. One is that when you create your application, there's a general information section. Also, as you're creating it, you'll have the option to add additional grantees or add additional contacts. I apologize. And you want to add everyone who you will want to be associated with the grant. So in web grants, the application, everything in the application becomes the grant record. And so the easiest, most streamlined way to make sure everyone you want to have access to the grant ultimately is to just add them right at the beginning when you create that application. So this can be anyone working on the application, but as well as like your executive director, if they sign the grant contract. This will just make sure that everyone can see that once it becomes a grant and be able to do what they need to do in there. I went over some of these. Again, you can preview the application if you like to work on your answers, offline in a Word document. You can preview and see the entire application on the screen if you click print at the top. There's a little print button and you can download it as a PDF from there. And then the mark is complete button, each form in the application, you'll be able to save and then mark is complete. Once you mark it as complete, you can still edit that form. So it's not locking it down or anything like that. But you will need to mark that as complete to allow the system for you to submit the application. And that will show up as a green check mark once that's marked. Again, you can still edit that form once you click that. You only won't be able to edit anything once you submit that final application. And finally, on the application, there is a field for your total project budget, and that total must match the total in your line item budget, or if you're applying for vehicles, that total reflected in your vehicle request. And if the totals don't match, we will use the lower amount that is indicated. So basically, you want to make sure before you submit it that that project total matches whatever your total is in your line item budget or all your vehicle requests added together. All right, before I move on, any questions of what I've covered so far? All right, hearing none, again, put any questions in the chat if you have them as I go along. I'm now going to go into some general application guidance, including some changes from prior years. So the first big change for everyone is that there's now going to be a pre-application for each funding opportunity. So pre-applications will be approved on a rolling basis until Friday, January 16th. If you do not submit a pre-application by January 16th, you will not be able to apply. Once the pre-application is approved by me, you will have immediate access to the full application until the deadline of February 1st. So basically, once you submit your pre-application, I'll get notified, I'll go in and approve it, and then it will release you into the entire application. The pre-application is not lengthy. It's 6 questions. It should not require you much time, so I don't want that to worry everyone too much. You will basically be responding to the type of organization, whether you're a first-time or returning applicant, your approximate request amount, which we're asking to be if you don't need to have your final request amount, but if you have an idea of what you're requesting, we ask that you estimate on the higher side for what you think you're going to submit for your final application. It'll ask for a very brief description of basically what you're applying for. It'll ask you to identify what Chisholm regions you're in. And then if you're in an MPO region, it will ask you to identify that as well. And there will be links in here to the Chisholm plan and to the MPO map to make sure that you can identify which that is. And all these questions will be required. If you're not in an MPO region, it will have a rural option for you to choose. As part of this pre-application, another change from the prior year is that your organization is no longer required to send a letter to the MPO informing them of your project. So basically, we're implementing this pre-application because we need to coordinate much earlier in the year with the MPOs to make sure they know exactly what needs to go into their tips. So we're getting rid of the letter requirement. DRPT is just going to take care of this based on those pre-applications. And for that, the reason we need you to estimate high on your application amount is because if the estimate is too low in their tips, we will have to go through another approval process for the adjustments. Again, this is not, if it's too low, it's fine. We can do that process. I don't want you to worry about this. But just asking that if you're not exactly sure, just go on the higher end rather than the lower end of your request. Or if you know exactly what you're requesting, you can comment for that. That's fine too. All right, going through the project types under the funding opportunities, these have not changed from prior years. We still have capital vehicle for replacement and/or expansion vehicles. It will be an 80% federal, 10% state, and 10% local match. So retaining that 10% match from last year. Other capital covers mobility management, contracted transportation, and other capital purchases such as software or IT equipment. That's an 80% federal match, 16% state, and 4% local. And then under operating, direct expenses for transportation services, volunteer mileage reimbursement projects, or transportation reimbursement vouchers for clients. That is a 50% federal, 40% state, and 10% local. So another change from prior years is that for other capital and vehicles, you will need to submit one application per category under those funding opportunities. So under other capital, if you're applying for mobility management, that will be one application. If you're applying for contracted transportation, that will be another application. And then if you're applying for other capital, that will be another application. Same with capital vehicle. We're no longer combining expansion and replacement together. We're going to separate those out into one application for expansion vehicles, one application for replacement vehicles. And the reason we need to do this is because we need to tie it more easily to our FTA application. This is just kind of a visualization of how this will look. So under each funding opportunity, I just kind of spelled out, it'll be one application per. These are the names of the funding opportunities for your reference. Again, under operating, it will just be one, since there are other categories under that. And then other capital, it would be 3 separate applications for each of these topics. Now, I know some of you are probably sad because you're thinking, well, it's all the same answers. This is going to be really annoying. But luckily, another change we have is that you can now copy applications from prior years and any applications you have in process in the system. So unfortunately, I can't demo this in real time just because of how our system works, but I took screenshots of how this will look. And basically in the in each funding opportunity, like I kind of pulled up before in my demo, you'll see once you click into the funding opportunity, any applications you're working on or have submitted for that funding opportunity. And then you'll see a button here that says copy existing application. You'll want to click on that, and that will take you to this screen where it will allow you to choose any applications that you would like to copy within that funding opportunity. And so, for example, I know a lot of you do both, let's say, mobility management and contracted transportation. If you've written your mobility management application, it's still in editing mode, you just have it sitting there, you can copy that application and then just have that be your contracted transportation application as well. This is something that what I saw when I demoed this, and you guys will have to tell me if this is what you see on your side, but it looks like other applications from other funding opportunities in editing mode also pop up. I'm not exactly sure what you'll see in terms of other funding opportunities, but I know that within the same funding opportunity, you'll be able to see your prior applications there. So it may be all of your applications for every funding opportunity that pop up for you to copy, which might be helpful, but basically, I know for sure within the funding opportunity, you'll be able to copy any prior applications as well as any applications you're working on. So you'll select whatever application you want to copy, hit copy application, and then it will pop up the new copy of the application right here. You'll see at the top, it will title it copy. So the first thing you'll want to do is click into that general information tab and go ahead and retitle it with, like I referenced before, those standard titles. So this, for example, could say, other capital, contracted transportation, if you had copied your mobility management one. You'll save the form. And then once you go back to the funding opportunity, you will see your original application and then the copy with your new title on there. And then you'll be able to click into each of those and make edits, submit, etc. Of course, if you want to start a new application from scratch, you can always click the Start New Application button, and that will give you a blank application. I'm going to pause here real quick because I saw some comments in the chat. Yes, January 16th. I'll go back to my pre-app slide. January 16th is the pre-application deadline. Will we need to pre-apply for each type of application we are applying for? Hold on, let me think about this. Yes, you will need to pre-apply for each type of application you're applying for. Will each application require its own public notice advertisement? They can be combined. So yeah, the public notice can be combined for sure into one notice. That's no problem. You can combine really anything you're applying for into one public notice. It doesn't have to be separate. So if you're applying for vehicles as well, you could put that in there. The point of the public notice is really just to notify the public that you're applying for this program funding. Doesn't have to be separated. Are the questions the same as last year? They will be. My plan is for them to really be the same. Yeah, so that when you copy any prior year applications, it should pull over all your answers from last year. If there's any differences, it would be something added, which would be pretty minor. Not planning on adding any narrative questions. All right, let me go back over here. All right, so application components, as we've kind of talked about, sorry, I just saw Susan's question. Pre-applications open December 1st. So pre-applications open on December 1st. So when the application opens, and then I'll approve them on a rolling basis until the 16th. And Susan also asked, will we have access to work the full application answers prior to the 15th? No, you will not. So yeah, you need to get that pre-application in as soon as you can to be able to access the full application. Again, it should not take you very long to get that in. You just want to make sure that you answer all those questions. All right. I'm going to move along. You guys can keep putting questions in the chat. I'm going to get through this section. So the application components, as we talked about, the organizational profile where you have some required attachments, the narrative, as we've discussed previously, you can submit the exact same answers in the narrative if for the same type of project. So if you're applying for, capital vehicles and operating, the operating is for the vehicles. The narrative will be very similar and you can just copy and paste from one to the other. And like I mentioned, you can now copy answers, applications from one year to the next, and in-process applications as well. And then with attachments, similarly, You'll have one quarterly report projections template that has the different funding opportunity types along the bottom. If you're doing multiple funding opportunity types, you can just submit that same template for each one. Similar, like Patrick asked about the public notice, you can use the same public notice for any of them. That was a good point. And then this, I put together sort of your cheat sheet for key dates, things you need to pay attention to in terms of deadlines, as well as when you need to get some of these attachments completed. So I would say starting now, ensure that your sam.gov account is active. All applicants are required to have an active sam.gov account to apply, and you will have to take a screenshot of that page in sam.gov showing that your account's active. If you don't have a sam.gov account, definitely get started on that now. Monday, December 1st, pre-applications will open. I'll approve them on a rolling basis through January 16th. Once that's approved, you'll have access to the full application. By January 15th, you'll need to update all vehicles in Trans Am. This is for pre-existing vehicle applicants only. Friday, January 16th, I should have put the time, but it will be 11:59 p.m. The pre-applications will close. And if you do not submit a pre-application by this date, you will not be able to submit a full application. So once we close that, no one will have access to the full application. By January 20th this year is when you need to publish your public notice of intent to apply. This needs to be published as a legal notice in at least one publication in your service area. This can be the publication, or we ask that it's the publication with the greatest circulation. So there may be multiple, but you really just need to use one. And then before February 1st, if there's any public transit agencies in your area, they need to be notified of your intent to apply. And then Sunday, February 1st, 11:59, the applications close. Okay, so our funding priorities are the same as in previous years. Our first priority is to continue support for existing 5310 programs, prioritizing capital to meet the FTA's minimum funding requirements of 55%. Our second priority is to increase publicly available services to the eligible population. This could include any of the eligible project types that are not offered on a client or customer only basis. And then final priority is to expand the availability of existing client-based customer service transportation programs, including expansion vehicles to existing client-based services. For the attachments, I have color-coded here required attachments for all, blue or in red. In blue, we have required attachments if applicable to you, and then black is optional. So the required attachments are here in red, including these that we already discussed, the public notice, and then this should say FY27. I apologize, but this is your quarterly report projections. And then blue is required if applicable, the public transit providers notification and a sample letter of notice. So you just need to provide the list and the letter you sent them. It doesn't have to be each and every letter you sent. It can just be an example of one. And the list of those that you notified. This can also be combined into one attachment. That's an option, or you can put them in two. And these are only applicable if there are public transit agencies in your area. And then this attachment, this is kind of a change because we've moved the operating other capital reporting into web grants. If you have a completed prior performance report for vehicles, you'll want to attach that as well. For operating other capital, that doesn't apply because I have your site visit forms in web grants. Project type specific attachments, the required attachment for operating other capital is your project budget with the template provided. If you are coming in for a project that involves a procurement, like a purchase of software, if this is a new procurement, you will need to provide an independent cost estimate. If it's a if it's a procurement you've already done, I may have you attach your contract with that. So like if you have a contracted service, I might have you attach your contract with that as well. Sorry, I didn't specify that here. But then if this is kind of new, or you could say returning a requirement, if you're applying for mobility management, a position through mobility management, I'm going to require that you attach a job description for that position. Again, it could be a general job description. You might have multiple mobility managers. For capital vehicle, required attachments are your copy of vehicle insurance and your preventative maintenance plan and schedule. So this is kind of what I was referring to previously, the documents that you need to have in your organizational profile. In order to apply, you need to have your signed Web Grants entity agreement, your W-9 form, and for returning grantees, I know we went through a big process of getting your state master agreements updated and signed. Those need to be in there as well. And then you'll have post-award requirements. Certs and assurances don't come out until after you're awarded, so you don't need to worry about that. But these, if for the entity agreement, that document has not been updated. So if you have a current signed entity agreement in there, that's good to go. You don't need a new one. Same with the W-9. And then again, we went through the state master agreement process. If anyone has a question or concern about that, just let me know. And then I always like to throw this up here just so everyone's aware that if you are awarded, there will be a lot more documentation that you will need to have as a grantee. As many of you are probably aware, as we've gone through a lot of this in compliance reviews. All right, I'm going to pause here for questions. I see Tony asks, Jess, you'd like to see a receipt or a contract for a ride scheduling system. You already procured the ride scheduling system, Tony? Yes. And then you're just paying the like maintenance on that, or requesting the maintenance on that, or like the annual fee. No, you don't need to provide the contract for that, because that's not you're not asking for money for a procurement. I know it's a little different with contracted services versus software. Any other questions? So I'm thinking back to Lucinda's question about the separate pre-app for each type. And I think the answer is actually you will just submit one pre-application per funding opportunity. Because once you submit the pre-application, then it will automatically give you access to the full application, which then you can copy or, create multiple of. So yeah, sorry about that, Lucinda. I hadn't fully thought through that through line, but it should be one pre-app per funding opportunity. Okay. Any other questions? I know it's a big change. and we're gonna all work through this together. All right, if not, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the capital vehicle program. If you're not interested in capital vehicles, Lee, sorry, going back to the chat here, slide 47 is this slide. Six. Oh, I haven't gotten that far yet. Sorry. Oops. I went too far on my own slideshow. My apologies. Hold on. I got lost. There we go. Sorry about that, Lee. All right. I'm going to move on. And if you have questions about this slide, you'll have access to these slides after the presentation. And you can reach out to me. But sorry, I did get lost in here. And before I go to the capital vehicles section, I'm going to talk quickly about the quarterly report attachment. So the quarterly report projections, that's required for all grantees for all project types. There will be pre-selected metrics provided to you in that template, which will be available on that funding opportunity page. You will fill out projections for each project type and submit it as an attachment. Again, this is by funding opportunity type. So those are still kind of like grouped together here. So we ask that everyone fill out the all projects tab, and then there'll be a tab for funding opportunity with the different performance metrics that you'll be required to track if you're awarded. This is what that worksheet looks like. And you'll see, again, this is the same as prior years. You won't be able to edit any of these metrics. Those will be locked. And when you go to fill out these columns, or sorry, when you go to fill out the targets, you will just fill out the highlighted areas, and that will just give us the projections of what you're thinking you'll do in the prior year. Again, this doesn't have to be exact. You can look at your prior year performance and kind of use that as a basis for an estimate. I've gone through this with a number of folks on performance reporting, but just a reminder, when we talk about trips, that's unlinked passenger trips are each time a passenger boards a vehicle. And a passenger is defined as, a senior, person with disabilities. You can also count personal care attendants if you wish. And it's each time they board the vehicle, and that is distinct from the total number of unique clients who receive a service. So when you think about total number of clients, that's the total unduplicated number of people that you serve per year, regardless of how many trips they might take. And again, this is just sort of going through, what you need to fill out if you're applying for these different funding opportunities. There will also be a quarterly report guide that kind of breaks down each of those metrics and defines them for you as you're looking at those. All right. I'm going to keep my eye out for any questions, but I'm going to keep moving along to make sure I try to make time for each area here. Sorry, there we go. All right, we're going to move on to capital vehicles. For those who are not interested in applying, maybe take a water break. This will just take a few minutes. So for capital vehicles, these are for replacement or expansion vehicles for new accessible vehicles that are purchased by DRPT on your behalf. If you are requesting a replacement vehicle, that means you're requesting a replacement of a 5310 funded vehicle. So if you purchased a vehicle using your own funds that is not eligible for replacement, that would be considered, any application for that type of vehicle would be considered an expansion. But if you want to replace a vehicle that was purchased using 5310 funds, you need to, you can replace them if they have met their useful life, which is defined as 4 years and 100,000 miles. As many of you know who work with me on these, very old vehicles that are 10 plus years old, I will also approve as a replacement. So just reach out to me if you have a question about a vehicle you want to replace. There's also an opportunity to put some notes in, like if it's a vehicle that has a lot of repairs that are needed. I can often work with you on that. But in general, go by this 4 years and 100,000 miles to replace the vehicle. Requested vehicle replacements must match Trans Am. So in the Web Grants application form, you will fill out what vehicles you're requesting to be replaced. That information needs to match up with what we have in Trans Am for that vehicle. That includes that VIN number. Please double check your VIN numbers when you put them into Web Grants to make sure they tie, and as well as that mileage. So make sure you update Trans Am with your vehicle mileage or odometer reading, and that matches what you're putting into Web Grants. Again, we've got the 10% local match for these this year. That is collected before the vehicles are ordered, and the vehicles must be used for the sole purpose of transporting seniors and people with disabilities. I put this timeline in here, but I will caveat that this may change slightly. Our timeline for ordering vehicles often shifts because of when our state contracts end or are modified, as we try to avoid any price increases. But in general, we'll probably be following a pretty similar process as last year, where once we notify you of our intent to award you, then we'll reach out to Sunny Merriman to start working with you on your vehicle orders. And then we get those orders to me via Sunny Merriman, and then I'll be contacting you about that local match request. And this may not be the deadline for local match exactly, but I would anticipate it will probably be around the same time period, the end of summer or early fall, to get in your local match, and then I place the vehicle orders. I already went over most of these requirements. I'll just mention, we'll talk about preventive maintenance, operator training. That is something that we ask you to describe in your narrative, your driver training program. If you do not have an established driver training program, you'll need to describe more about how you're going to establish that in the narrative. In terms of preventive maintenance, every applicant needs to have a preventive maintenance plan in place. This is your policies and procedures for maintaining the vehicles, and includes a maintenance schedule and when different preventive maintenance tasks will occur. It should also include that you will conduct pre-trip inspections and that you have a pre-trip inspection log. And it must identify a single mileage interval for oil changes. Again, many of you, not all of you probably, but many of you have gone through the compliance review this past year. And so if you have an updated preventive maintenance plan, make sure you include that updated plan. Or if we talked about updates that we need to your plan, make sure that it's, you make those updates and include that with your application to ensure that it's compliant. And again, just putting up this post-award, there'll be more written policies that you will need to have in place if you are awarded. But let's talk about the available vehicles. So available vehicles on the state contract that you can apply for have not changed from last year. The pricing has gone up slightly. And on here I have, as we usually do, the estimated cost. So I have another slide about this later, but basically the way we come up with these prices is that we take the base price that's on our state contract and I add a 10% contingency on top of that. So that's what this number represents, is that base price plus 10% contingency. So the actual vehicle price when you work with Sunny Merriam on that, may be slightly less, just because we add that contingency in case there are any price increases, so we don't have to go back and redo the awards. But this is kind of to give you an idea of around where your estimated local match will be if you're coming in for any of these vehicles. And then again, this year we've got the low floor BOC available on 13 to 19 passenger options. This is definitely the most expensive option, but it is just a different type of vehicle that it doesn't have a lift, it has a ramp, and it is quite low to the ground. If you're considering this, I might suggest you reach out to Chad at Sunny Merriman just because it is a very low clearance, but it's a good option for some people. So as I mentioned, those prices are actual pricing plus contingency. Each vehicle type can be further modified to your specifications. But I'll skip to this bullet. You can modify each vehicle and add things onto it, but what's very important to note here is that the award amount is fixed, and any modifications that bring that vehicle price to over the award amount will be charged directly to you by Sunny Merriman. So DRPT only will pay up to the award amount. You can max out your award amount and just pay that 10% local on the award. But if there's any amount over the award, Sunny Merriman will charge you directly, and that is not related to your local match. The contract will reflect the award amount, but the local match owed will reflect the actual price. So your local match that you pay will ultimately be on the actual price of the vehicle, which may be lower than, again, that award amount plus contingency. And finally, I talked about Trans Am a bit, but just to reiterate that if you are a returning applicant, you should have a Trans Am account. You'll want to make sure you have access to that account and that you update all of your vehicles in your inventory in Trans Am by January 15th. Trans Am should only be used to manage 5310 vehicles. And when you update those vehicles, you want to update the mileage, service status, and condition of the vehicles, the most important being mileage, because that's how we determine whether the vehicle has reached its useful life. If you're applying for vehicles for the first time, you'll work with me to set up your account if you're awarded. All right, any questions for my capital vehicle folks? And then you guys can sign off if you're not sticking around for the other two funding opportunities. Chat. Okay. All right, thanks guys. See some vehicle folks are signing off. All right, I'm gonna keep moving. Again, put any questions in the chat, I'll get back to them. but we're going to go ahead and talk about other capital. So defining other capital and what falls under that. Again, we talked about these categories, but just want to go a little more in depth into each of these. Under other capital, you've got mobility management as an eligible project type. These are projects that are intended to improve coordination among existing public and human service transportation providers. It does not include the cost of trips or providing transportation itself. So this can include trip planning services, coordination across multiple agencies, one call, one click centers, or other sort of planning functions around coordination, as well as travel training is eligible under this. I want to emphasize here that mobility management is intended to serve really more than one agency. So if a person who is, scheduling trips for one agency is not a mobility manager, that is just a scheduler, that would fall under operating. So for this application cycle and future ones, we're going to be looking a little more closely at what people are coming in for under mobility management. And that's also why I'm asking for that job description of a mobility manager. If you have any questions about this, I'm happy to discuss it. But if you do come in for mobility management and we determine that it's really operating, we will ask you to move that to an operating grant, or might move it for you. Also under other capital is the capital cost of contracting or contracted transportation. This is using a federally compliant procurement process to contract with a transportation provider. This is not an operating expense. This is, contracting with a vendor. Some examples of this, if there are folks you want to talk to about this, include Hanover Dash, so Hanover County contracts with users. Cortran, Roanoke County contracts with VRT to provide their service. That's how they provide their service, and that's eligible. And then finally, other capital falls under or other capital for software technology. If you are procuring a new software technology for your agency, that would most likely fall under other capital. It is somewhat dependent on the price of the software, but basically, any major trip scheduling software, if it's your first time purchasing that, that would really fall under a procurement process here. And you would need to submit an independent cost estimate with your application to show that you're have some proof of basically why you're requesting the amount you're requesting for that. In terms of the rest of this, I'm going to spend kind of talking about the line item budgets. Obviously, since we're submitting separate applications for each of these project types, your line item budgets will look different for each. And I'll kind of go over that a little bit more. But in general, these are how the categories on the line item budgets are defined. And these are really spelled out in a lot more detail in the application guidebook. But just want to point out a few things, like if you're applying for mobility management under other capital, if you're using the materials and supplies categories, this is meant to cover anything that has a per unit cost of $5,000 or less. It needs to be used by only, that program or for the specific purposes of the project. This could include things like office supplies, technology like, iPads, things that, again, per unit cost less than $5,000. Bus wraps also fall under this. And then marketing, this may not exceed $10,000 or 10% of the total project budget. This should be advertising for your transportation service only, so not for your general organization, but just the services this project is funded by. This can include advertising, printed marketing materials, phone costs, postage, printing, kind of anything that around communications for that project. When we talk about equipment, this is kind of a more rare category where it would be a per unit cost of 5,000 or more. Generally, this would kind of fall under that needing to do a procurement. So if that's something you're looking for, you could use this category and again do an independent cost estimate, and that for that category. Under the other category, this is where if you're coming in for contracted transportation, you would use that. And I will give an example of what the template looks like. But you can also, for example, if you're applying for mobility management, use other for program related expenses that don't fall neatly into these categories. So if you're doing background checks for staff, new staff, or if you're coming in for like Tony mentioned, like ongoing like monthly software maintenance costs, you could use that other category for this. And then indirect costs have gone up to 15% de minimis. So this was the year that was put into place from the federal government. So now you can use a 15% de minimis rate unless you have a negotiated indirect cost rate that you can use. And so we'll see that in a second. But again, I want to talk about if you're coming in for mobility management, this is kind of breaking down what's eligible under that based on those categories I was just talking about. Unless you are a regional one call, one click system, you're only eligible for up to 2 staff salaries. If you have a question about whether or not you're kind of a regional system, we can definitely talk about your project. But in general, if you're doing more of just like a smaller level of mobility management, it's only 2 staff salaries and benefits. Marketing advertisements, we discussed that. Indirect costs, I want to talk about that a little bit more, so I like to try to define this a little bit. Indirect costs are considered, the cost of doing business, and you do not need to provide any justification for what falls under, like what you're going to spend your indirect costs on. So you don't need to break that down or say how much of whatever the amount is needs to go toward this. Just know that if you use that indirect costs, you can use that toward, rent for your building, utility costs, or any of like staff or other costs that sort of have to do with running the entire organization. So executive staff, administrative benefits for those associated costs. So again, the direct costs for this for these projects are really meant to be specific to the transportation program, not any of the other services you might provide. Ineligible expenses, there's a bunch. I won't go through all of them, but some we like to point out are passes or vouchers for existing public transit or paratransit. That's not eligible. Any clothing is not eligible under this program. There's one I was gonna, oh yeah. I like to point out, membership dues or trainings, like if you want your staff to get certified as part of this or have membership, these fall under our RTAP program. So don't come in for these under this funding opportunity. That would be if you're awarded, you would then be eligible to come in for our training program grants, which are 100% funded. So just wanted to pull up real quick the examples of line item budgets. Again, knowing that you'll be doing a separate application per category. So looking at a sample of a mobility management line item, these are those categories I was defining earlier. And again, those are spelled out more in the grant application guidance. And then here we have a full-time mobility manager, a part-time assistant, we have marketing, postage, and this person's coming in for a laptop and are saying, it's only for the mobility manager to use. It's $3,000, so it's a material or supply. It's less than that $5,000. So we're going to put it here. Marketing expenses fall under this category. Salaries and fringe benefits are separated. Also want to point out that if they're full-time, you can indicate that. If it's an hourly position, you need to indicate the hours times hourly rate that they'll be spending on this particular project. So if someone is sharing responsibilities, has multiple roles, they're an hourly employee, you need to make sure you indicate the number of hours they're spending on the transportation related project that this is funding. And then the blue at the bottom, these are auto calculated along the bottom. And then it comes up with your modified total direct costs, which is what the indirect cost is calculated off of. So here is where if you want to request the full 15%, you would plug in 15% into this box, and it will give you, your indirect costs, how much you're coming in for. And then this total at the bottom, this is what I'm referring to as you need to make sure this aligns with that total budget request in the actual web grants application form. This will be the final sort of thing you fill out in your application. You need to make sure those two numbers tie together perfectly. So that would be a mobility management example. And then on here, you can see I just hid these other columns, which you're welcome to do as well if you're working on this and don't want to be confused. But basically, if you're coming in for contracted transportation, you might have a couple different providers. If you don't have their names yet, that's fine. But if you have an idea of how many providers, or if you're using multiple providers you want to use, I would separate them out by line and then, put your budget amount for each one. And then that will give your total at the bottom. Same with if you're procuring a software system, you will really just have one, category here under other, and that will be your total there. All right, any questions for other capital projects? What about advertising for volunteer drivers? Is that okay? Yes, Lucinda, I mean, you're part of a mobility management system, so that would fall under, if they're coordinating with you, then yes, that would be fine. And Susan, the postage, I don't know if, I guess it's allowed. I don't know when that was not previously allowed, but it is allowed. Any other questions?
Jess, can I talk my question?
Sure, go ahead.
So if we are paying for services, but we don't have a contract with the service provider, like we pay for each service individually, kind of like a taxi or something, would that just be like contracting for services?
I think so. Can you walk me through that scenario? As in, would you be paying or would you be reimbursing the client?
So we are, we have like some emergency, we have a fund for like emergency transportation. If somebody, has a need and isn't able to meet it any other way, and they meet our criteria, we'll pay for the transportation. And so we've got like a list of like 5 private providers, and we go to the first one and say, will you give this ride? on this day. And if they say yes, then we just pay for it with a credit card.
Okay.
And then we put it like, yeah, so that like is our system.
Okay. Yeah. For that, use the other category for that. And basically what I would ask is like in the line item and then in the narrative description, just explain that like you just said it. Just like in the line item, you could say like, um, you know, taxi trips, and then in the narrative, just say, like you said, like,
Okay.
we'll schedule the ride for the person and pay for it with a credit card.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Susan? I think, yeah, there you go.
Hey, Jess, it's Debbie. I'm with Susan because I
Oh,
was
hey,
having a
Debbie.
hard time signing in.
No worries.
I have a quick question. With Hanover Dash, we have the other capital operating because we contract, but we also have a small marketing sum. Do we put
Yep.
that all in one spreadsheet like we did last year, or put that separate? Because I noticed marketing was under mobility management and the other categories, which we will not have.
Yeah, I think what we're gonna have to do for you is have you submit an operating grant for marketing.
Okay. So a separate one?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, just for marketing.
Yep.
So then I need to do 2 applications as well.
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify because last year.
Yeah,
it was a
no,
little
I
different.
appreciate that. Cause yeah, this is sort of changing things a bit, but part of it is making sure we're compliant with what FTA needs from us. So, yeah.
So basically it would be the same exact duplicate grant. Right?
Yeah,
Grant
yeah.
narrative. Yeah, the
Correct.
same
Yeah,
thing.
you're just saying
Just-
like, we have a contracted service that we're marketing for. So it's all the same narrative.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on other capital? All right, I'm gonna move on to operating. So for this, basically operating is sort of, it's really the direct delivery of service, or trips beyond existing public and human service transportation options. So for this, a lot of people who have vehicles will also come in for operating if they have a publicly available service. And eligible activities for trips is expanded paratransit, so any accessible transportation beyond that 3/4 of a mile required by public transit. Expanded hours of service, same day service, door-to-door services, travel training is also eligible under operating. And then vouchers for, volunteer mileage reimbursement. And then vouchers like repayments to clients if they paid for like taxis or other human service providers. It's also, just in general, it's publicly available transportation, direct costs associated with that for the eligible population. So all that's to say, it's not publicly available. Just means it's not client based, and essentially anyone from your community who meets this eligibility requirement could call in and ultimately request a ride for your services. The match amounts for this are 50% federal, 40% state, 10% local. The eligible or the definitions again of the categories are, I'm not going to go through all of them because I went through most of them under other capital. It's a lot of the same types or categories of expenses. However, under operating, one difference is that fuel, maintenance, and insurance for 5310 vehicles are eligible. And this is preventive maintenance only. So major overhauls like replacing an engine is not eligible. But for any of those, ongoing expenses, oil changes, inspections, car washes, that sort of stuff, anything that keeps that vehicle running day to day, that's all eligible under this fuel maintenance and insurance. Let's see, kind of walk through the equipment, but under other in operating, this can also include other program related expenses such as background checks or ongoing expenses related to technology, like that scheduling software, monthly fees that I mentioned. The other category also captures like if you're providing volunteer mileage reimbursement vouchers, or if you're providing vouchers directly to clients to help pay for their, pay for their transportation they're getting through like a taxi service or something like that. Again, this is kind of similar to like the mobility management slide, but in this case for operating, when you're looking at what's eligible under here, it's your net operating expenses. So this one is assuming you're providing direct transportation. It's your operating expenses less any fare revenue. So if you do charge for your services, that will be ultimately subtracted from what you're reimbursed for. So that's really on the back end. If you're approved and you submit a claim, any of the fees that you collect will be subtracted out of that as well. But other eligible expenses under operating include basically anything that goes toward the direct provision of service for transportation. So when we talk about salaries, we're usually referring to driver salaries and benefits, your dispatchers, schedulers, customer service that have to do with transportation directly. And the rest of these are kind of like what I mentioned previously: marketing, limited support supplies, and then indirect costs, and then that fuel maintenance and insurance that I described. Ineligible expenses are the same. I won't walk through those, but just kind of make sure you're aware of that when you're thinking about what you want to request. And then again, I have kind of a sample of an operating line item budget. And this is what I, prefer to see this sort of breakdown on the application. Needing to see, if you have drivers, how many drivers you have, and what their hours per week and hourly rate is. Similar with other positions, or if it's full-time, you can just indicate that, or part-time. And then using these categories to match up with each line item that you're requesting. Again, you could put tablets under this for your vehicles, under that 5,000 per unit cost, bus wraps, marketing, postage, background checks, and then your fuel maintenance and insurance lines will be here. And you can use on the template, there's another tab that can help you calculate what your fuel maintenance and insurance costs or requests should be, using the number of vehicles that you'll be requesting for, how many weekly hours of service, and it will calculate kind of what goes into that category there. So you can use that to help you calculate those amounts based on your 5310 fleet. And then again, your indirect cost rate, you'll put it in here. You can use 15%. I like to note you don't have to use 15%, it's up to 15. So if for some reason you want to keep your total request amount under a certain number for whatever reason, you can adjust that, or you don't have to request indirect cost rate. It's totally up to you. You just can't go over that unless you have a negotiated direct cost rate, which is a totally different thing. All right. Let me go to the chat. Monica, thank you. Any other questions before I let you go? I will just repeat for the good of the group that I will be emailing you. We'll give you a follow-up email with the recording, the slides, and some of the resources I mentioned. The slides have links to a lot of different resources. I'd encourage you to take advantage of those. But as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me and I'm happy to talk to you about your application. Thank you all.
Jess, can you hang on, or do we need
Yeah.
to reach out
Um,
separately?
Why don't we reach out separately because this is recorded.
Okay.
But I can give you a call.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yep. Bye.